coming up to retirement now. You've had 66 years of life.
Yep.
I guess you might have been doing a little bit of reflecting on what's happened over that time. Could you go a little bit into that?
There's a particular painter I like called Sam Toft. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of her, but she's a local artist, and she draws paintings of someone called Ernest Hemingway Mustard. The wife is called Violet, and there's a dog called Doris. And you'll see a few pictures on the screen. I love them. The first one I love, it's one along the seafront, just outside my flat. Ernest Hemingway Mustard and his dog riding along a bike with the dog in his basket. It's a great one. The second one I really love, because I love looking at the moon, and there's a lovely one of just Ernest and the dog Doris staring at the moon. The third one I bought recently, because this is part of the reflective bit, and it's a painting just of Ernest and his dog.
Right.
And the painting just says, "How did we get so old?" And I'm thinking, how did I get to 66 years old? When I started out I was quite young, and now I'm 66. So yeah, I've been thinking about all the different ways God has worked in my life, led me and guided me. My old mum, she loved poetry. She was a bit of a poet herself, and she used to tell me some old ditties and things. One of them was, "Tall oaks from little acorns grow," and I've always reflected on that through life. But there was a particular poem she loved, and she used to tell me this, and it's called "My life is but a tapestry. My life is but a tapestry between my God and me. I cannot choose the colours, he weaveth steadily. Oft times he weaveth sorrow, and I in foolish pride forget he sees the upper and I the underside. Not till the loom is silent and the shutters cease to fly will God unroll the canvas and reveal the reason why. The dark threads are as needful in the weaver's skilful hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern he has planned. He knows, he loves, he cares. Nothing this truth can dim. He gives the very best to those who leave the choice to
That's
him.
lovely. That really is lovely.
And that's kind of what I want to, reflect on, the different way God's weaved his patterns in my life to bring me to this time in my life. Yeah.
And I think this is why it'd be lovely to, I know that within the church service a little bit later on, you're going to be going into kind of your life around Southwark Christian Community Church.
Yeah.
I'd love to know just a little bit around kind of before that, I mean, I suppose the best place to start really would tell us really where it all began and when you first kind of sense God's call, because I think that's one of the things when you become a Christian, you always remember that first time you remember hearing God reach out to you.
Yeah.
And I think I'd love to know when the first time when that was for you and when you heard God's call on your life.
I was born into a lovely family. I had really good mum and dad, really grateful to them over the years for all that they put into my life. Loving, good Christian parents. And then I've got an older sister that you all know here, and she's been a great support over these last years particularly. And then I've got two older brothers. So this is us as a family. There's the six of us. And I was grateful to my brothers because they taught me how to climb trees, play football, ride bikes and go and watch trains. For my sister, I'm more grateful to her for trying to make me a bit more domesticated because she loved housework and stuff, and I've never been that good at it, but she did do her best. So, lovely family, very, very grateful to that. Both Andrew and I, we went to the same school. That was Churchgate Street School in Old Harlow. And generally, I love school. Generally, I loved all the different subjects. I think I was quite good at maths and English. And it was at that school that one of the teachers said that I had a flair for foreign languages. I think it was probably when I was about 8 or 9 years old that I first sensed God might have a call on my life.
That early?
Yeah. We went to a church, and in the church, the minister there, he'd been a missionary in the Congo. Okay. And so he used to pepper his sermons with talks about what happened in the Congo, which got a bit nauseating, to be honest, but it did inspire me a bit of other countries and doing God's work in other countries. Yeah. And then we used to have visiting speakers to the church, people like Richard Wurmbrandt, who was, I think, smuggling Bibles into Russia and stuff like that. And we had other missionaries. Now, I was inspired by that, but it also freaked me out because they all looked so old-fashioned. They looked as if they were off another planet. And I remember thinking, I might be called to do this kind of thing. It was the last thing I wanted to do. Then I went to secondary school, and things began to go a little bit pear-shaped then, I have to say. You know. I got this good report that I was a pleasure to work with. But
Yeah.
I guess probably I was at Hatfield Girls Grammar School, and that's when we had moved by that stage to a place called Brookman's Park. And I guess it was just teenage rebellion or attitude, that can start in your life. Going back to school reports, some of my school reports when I was around about 14, 15, just showed what was going on inside me. And I do remember it really, really well. So, for example, I had this school report which said, Lynda is capable of good work, but she must learn to work quietly and not distract others. And it says, Lynda's exuberance is not always welcome in class, although it is appreciated in other activities. Well, that was a bit, But it got worse. When I was about 15, 16, I must have been going through a stage of, inner rebellion. Lynda is capable of good work. If she wishes to study this subject further, she must be less obstructive in her attitude. Yeah. But it was what was going on. So I remember it well, and I didn't like what was going on. I wanted to change, but I didn't know how. Did
you really think you felt God's call kind of when you were about 8 or 9? Or do you think it was more kind of in that rebellious side?
Well, I think this is all part of God weaving things together. And I think what I've learned over the years is when God calls, he then has to do a lot of work in you before you're ready to take on that call. Yeah. And for me, it took 20 years before I was ready. And so, yes, you start out and you maybe sense something, but then God has to shape you. And sometimes that is dealing with the dark side and the inner things that are going on with you. And so that's where you meet with him. And certainly for me, I did meet with him at this stage in my life, which I'm so grateful for. That's when I became a Christian.
So you were saying about how that you became a little bit of a rebellion, and that's how you really kind of became a Christian. So could you tell us a little bit how that actually happened?
Yeah, I remember it well. I was about 15. I didn't want to go on holiday with my parents anymore. That was probably part of the attitude. So I wanted to go with a friend, and my parents said, well, you can only go to a Christian place where we know that you'll be safe. We won't let you just go off. So my friend and I boarded the coach to go up to Capernwray Hall, which is in Carnforth in Lancashire, and was a Christian holiday centre. And that was a great time. We used to go and do stuff during the day, activities, go on visits, but in the evening there'd be Christian meetings. And I don't think in that time I'd heard anything that I'd never heard before, because I'd been brought up in the church. But most of the time it had gone in one ear and out the other. Whereas when up in Capernwray, maybe it was a different environment. And at the end of that week, I remember on the Friday night kneeling down beside my bed and becoming a Christian.
Wow.
And I remember the next day going home on the coach to Victoria coach station, and just as I was getting off the steps out of the coach, my mum met me. And I said, Mum, I've become a Christian, and she burst into tears.
Oh, wow.
So that was the start of it.
That was the moment.
But of course, that's that decision, and then there's still more work that God has to do to refine that and to grow in you. So that was about 15. About a year later, I was baptised at the church we're at, and that made a massive difference, I have to say, from then on. And going back to school reports, I started getting really good school reports.
There you go.
And I do know that was a change in my life. I really knew that my attitude and my spirit had changed because of God coming into my life. And the last school report I got says, Lynda is to be congratulated on her university place. She has had a good influence in the school and will, I'm sure, do well in the future.
The thing is, God influences people.
Absolutely.
So straight away, from your own school report, sounds like you're influencing yourself by that point, Lynda.
Absolutely. So I'm very, very grateful, and always will be, to become a Christian early on in my life.
So what happened next?
So actually my first jobs, I did two things, and they're both significant in this whole weaving together. Actually I stayed in Guildford where I'd been at university. Significant happened there is I bought my first house, which was quite a miraculous journey. Moment. How I got to buy a house on a very small income, but that's another part of God's weaving things together. I started training to be a TEFL teacher, English as a foreign language.
Right, okay.
So, and I got a job in the university where I had studied. So
amazing.
I had got a job teaching academic English to students who were coming over to do their degrees and that sort of thing. I remember one particular lady there, her name was Inji, she was Turkish.
Okay.
And I remember we'd worked with her a lot, and I remember it was my birthday. It was one day, it was my birthday, and I was not happy on my birthday for relationship reasons, but I felt God say, go and talk to her. And I did, and that day she became a Christian.
Oh, lovely.
And I'm thinking, God, you're such a strange being, because this is the day I feel worse, but today someone has come to faith in you.
I always say he works in wonderful ways, and it sounds like that was one of the times where, even when you're down, he works in wonderful ways. Yeah,
that's how God led. So I became an associate minister at Westborough United Reformed Church, which was just up the road. A few years later, a new minister came to the church. So I was an assistant to a second minister now, and this becomes a very significant part of my life. His name was Ray Whittle, and he's the only person I've met who was in the Hebridean revival. He was a minister in Scotland, and he knew people like Duncan Campbell, who were the prime movers in the Hebridean revival, and he used to regale me of stories of all sorts of things that happened when he was with Duncan Campbell. They saw miraculous workings of God. So he came to the church, and he became my mentor, and together with his wife, they've been lifelong friends since then, and still up to this point. Ray has since died, obviously, and June is now very poorly, but lifelong friends, and they had a massive impact on my life, and we were real kindred spirits, because Ray was a real evangelist. He was quite zany. He wanted to be outside on the streets. He encouraged me to go and train for becoming a Christian minister.
Wow.
And if it wasn't for him, I don't think I'd have gone for it, but he kept saying, no, you should go into the ministry. So I'm glad he did, and a couple of years later I was ordained to become a minister. So I was ordained up in London. It was a bit of an unusual ordination, because I wasn't being ordained to a church. I was being ordained to minister as part of Paraclete Christian Network International. Yeah, you'll see a picture of up on the screen, and one of the things in this picture that is again part of God's plan is my family are gathered here, and they've been great supporters in getting me into ministry. But in the corner there, you'll see the youth minister. He was my youth leader when I was still young, and I had that attitude problem. But he believed in me. He kept saying, you will be a mother to many, he said once. And I thought, that's rubbish, that's nonsense. But actually, it was true. He looks quite happy, because he obviously somehow guided me through those horrible years to get to this other place.
But I must ask, what was it that then led you to Southwark Christian Community Church?
Okay, well, after ordination, I continued working in Guildford for a bit, and then it was time for Ray Whittle to retire. And I thought, I don't want to become the assistant to another minister in this church. 2 is enough, I don't want a third one. So then he said, well, why don't you just come down to Lancing as well? So I thought, yeah, okay, I will do. But it was while I was down here, it was actually particularly when I was at Roffey Place that I met the then minister of Southwick, Brian Pickard, and he suggested I came and worked for the church. I think I did that in about 1998. So that's when the work in Southwick began, but that's another story.
I want to ask, if there was one thing that you could say to yourself back before you met God, what would it be?
All I can say is I'm so grateful to have become a Christian at a young age, and that's why I am passionate about children and youth work. I'm not particularly good at it, but I really long for people to become Christians early, because had I not become a Christian at that age, I think my attitude might have just continued getting worse and worse and worse, and that would have been a different pathway. So I kind of think that if you become a Christian early, then I knew I had a lot of stuff to work out in my life. I wasn't ready to become a minister for years, because there's selfishness and there's sort of all sorts of things that God's got to shape in your life. But if you start early, he can do it. And the verse I've always had is, seek God's kingdom first and his righteousness, and then everything else will be added. So I've tried to live by that, and I've had a great time. And that's what I'm passionate about, is that young people like yourself, Adam, that you learn and you grow and you keep growing and you keep growing, because then in 10, 20 years time, who knows what God might have for you and other young people who sense some kind of call upon their lives.
Well, look, before you go, I want to take this opportunity and just say thank you, really, because you've made a huge impact in my life. You've been there for many massive moments for me. So I just want to take this opportunity and just say thank you so much, and I will now let you talk about Southwark Christian Community Church and the 24 years that you've had there.